Hello and welcome back. Today we are continuing our lecture series on World War One. Specifically, we're going to talk about innovations in the weaponry during World War One. The first thing we have to talk about is these weapons are much more devastating than they had been in previous wars. We kind of caught a glimpse of this in the Civil War, the American Civil War, with Gatling guns and cannons being used, and more accurate weapons. But by the time we get to World War One, it's a whole new ball game. We've got machine guns, that are going to be wildly devastating, all kinds of rounds of ammunition, relatively easily. We're going to have artillery. We're going to have the first tanks. We're going to see the beginnings of air warfare and, poison gas. So just weapons become much more destructive. Each soldier is going to become deadly in and of themselves. In previous types of warfare, you really had to operate as a group. Rifles weren't accurate, so you stood shoulder to shoulder. Everybody fired at the same time. That put up a wall of fire, so you sent a wall of bullets at the enemy, and hopefully somebody would hit something. Now, each individual soldier has a long range, deadly, accurate rifle. And so the expectation is you're going to hit what you aim at. Now, it doesn't really work out that way, but you can hit what you aim at. They're going to have grenades. And so each soldier on their own becomes this deadly fighting force. And then, you've got some of them will have machine guns. Now, we don't have like personal use machine guns yet. We don't have M16s or AK-47s yet. The machine guns that we have are the Hiram Maxim machine guns. And those, it takes a couple of people to operate because they're so heavy, but I mean, they're still wildly devastating. And a couple of people can run across no man's land with them and set them up and relatively quickly and become very, very deadly. So these kind of innovations are just going to bring massive death on a scale that warfare had never really seen before. Trench mortars, mobile gun platforms. All of this is just going to make things much more deadly and devastating. This is the Maxim machine gun. Maxim machine gun is created by an American, Hiram Maxim. I want you to pay attention here because we're going to talk about like who invents things and then who's the first to embrace them. And I want to see if you catch a pattern here. So this machine gun is, created by an American, but it's going to be first, integrated on a massive scale by Germany. Germany's the first to recognize how important this is, and so they're going to buy these first. In 1914, they're going to have somewhere around 12,000 machine guns, and the British and the French are going to be slow to pick up on the importance of the machine gun. Now, this machine gun clearly isn't used by an individual. It weighs around 58, 60 pounds. It takes a couple people to operate, but it's going to be very deadly. It uses the recoil of the gun to load the next bullet, and so you can just it fires automatically. You can just hold the trigger down and really lay down quite a bit of fire. So Germany embraces these first. These are going to become deadly when used in combination with barbed wire. So you slow your enemy down, they can't move. And these are the things that are going to be spraying death across no man's land. Next up are the trench mortars. Germany is the first to possess the trench mortars. Essentially what a trench mortar is it's designed to attack trenches. Right? If I'm in my trench and you're in your trench, and we're both underground, and I pop my head up to shoot, I fire a bullet. That bullet travels straight. It will not go in the ground. So as long as you stay in your trench, you don't have to worry about my bullet. A trench mortar works differently. It lobs a shell that has explosives in it in an arcing angle. And so if you're in your trench, I just got to get the angle right on my trench mortar, and then boom, I fire a shell that's got explosives. It goes up in the air. It arches like shooting a basketball. And if I get it right, it will then explode in your trench. So these shells are filled with explosives at first, right? And then they realize that the explosives don't work really well because you have to time that it explodes right when it lands on somebody. But then eventually it will be filled with explosives and shrapnel. which means that they're going to lob it up like this. They're going to try and time it to where it actually explodes above the trench. And then there's a bunch of pieces of metal that then shoot out in like a shotgun kind of spray pattern that can shoot down and has a really broad range, and that can kill or injure the people underneath it. And then eventually they're going to start to put poison gas in them. And so poison gas is, a really hard thing to escape from. You might have a helmet on that protects you from the shrapnel, or you might hide in a bunker, but gas gets underneath helmets and it gets into bunkers. And so, it's going to be very, very scary. It also kills morale. The trench mortar is really going to make you feel like you're not safe even in your trench. So again, Germany's the first to embrace it. In 1914, they have 160 trench mortars. Great Britain has 0. Right. By 1918, however, because of British industrial capacity and America supporting the British, the British will have about 3,000, around 3,022. So, who's got the most machine guns? Germany. Who's got the most trench mortars? Germany. Again, Germany's outnumbered, but because they embrace technology, they embrace science, they embrace education, they're going to be able to overcome the fact that they're outnumbered by embracing all these things. Now, one of the exceptions to that are tanks. Tanks are developed by the British Navy. They actually take some old boats, slap some metal on it, put old ship's gun on it, and put tracks on them, and ship them out as tanks. And so they're developed by the British Navy. The British are the first to get them. By 1916, so 2 years into the war, the British will about 100 of them. They're going to be first used at the Battle of the Somme, and they're not going to be used effectively. So the one advantage that the technological advantage that the British have over the Germans are tanks. These are terrifying. And when the first Germans see these, they're going to be like seriously scared. They're going to be shooting at them, and the tanks just keep coming. Problem is, the tanks don't move very fast. They go about 2 miles an hour. Their just engines aren't advanced enough for them. The guns aren't very accurate. The people are going to be driving these things through little slits that it's going to be really tough to aim the gun. The guns don't have much range on them. I mean, like as far as aiming them, they can shoot far, but they're really hard to aim. And the British use them wrong. And so they're going to send a bunch of these across no man's land, and they're going to effectively get across no man's land, which is a huge win. But when they finally get to the German trenches, they're so slow that the Germans can just scatter. And then when the Germans scatter, the tanks don't have anybody to shoot. Eventually they leave and the Germans come back. And what the British fail to recognize is tanks are really only useful at this time when used in conjunction with infantry. And so what would work is you send the tanks first, and then you have like men hiding behind the tanks taking cover. When the tanks break the enemy's lines, then you have your infantry fill in the spaces that the Germans leave. Well, the British never figure that out. But guess who does? Germany. Germany will figure it out. Now, they won't figure it out in time to help them during World War I, but they figure it out in time for World War II. And so World War II, the German Nazis, are going to use blitzkrieg tactics that do exactly that. They use tanks to punch through their enemy, and then infantry to fill up the space that the tanks create. And so, unfortunately for Great Britain and the Entente, the fact that they have tanks doesn't really matter because they don't use them correctly. All right, this is a close-up of the tank. You can see it's really hard to drive. That's the slit that they're going to be looking through and trying to aim from. So you're just not going to be able to do much damage in these things. Now, we are going to see air warfare really kind of start. This is my Red Baron Snoopy. So air warfare is going to be coming around during World War I. It's really the beginnings of air warfare. It's not going to be as effective as you would think. It's going to be vital during World War II, but it's just starting, and we're just kind of figuring it out during World War I. Originally, it's zeppelins, or like essentially like hot air balloons for you know, lack. Um, that are used for observation. And so if your enemy's in a trench, you want to see what they're doing and how the troops are moving. Well, you got to have height to be able to do that. And so, they start to use zeppelins, which Germany is going to absolutely embrace. They're going to be the best at this. They're going to use the zeppelins to be able to see the battlefield, to tell when when the British and French are moving their troops around, when there might be an attack. And that's what they're really, they're using air warfare the most. Now there are going to be some Zeppelin attacks, even on civilian populations in the Allies' territory, but they're not going to be really effective. It's more or less a psychological thing. They're going to be dropping like grenades and bombs off. They're not very accurate, although it will kill some people. It's more psychologically terrifying that your enemy can attack you everywhere, that you just don't feel safe. It is scary, but it doesn't actually break your enemy's will to fight. Really, what we learned from World War One, World War Two, and beyond is that if you attack civilian populations, that's not going to break your enemy's will to fight. It's just going to consolidate their will to defend themselves. And so, don't attack civilian populations. It's not in your best interest. Now, once the Zeppelins kind of dominate the air, we're going to start to see airplanes being used too. So you want to shoot down those Zeppelins. Well, the Zeppelins don't move very fast. They're not maneuverable, and so they're easy targets to airplanes. And so we'll start to see airplanes being used. And so if one side puts up airplanes to shoot down the enemy Zeppelins, the other side has to put up airplanes to defend those Zeppelins, because the Zeppelins can't defend themselves. And that's where we really start to get dogfights, where dogfights are essentially when one enemy plane attacks another enemy plane, trying to shoot them down for control of the air. Germany, again, because Germany just embraces education, they're going to train their pilots the best. One of the most notorious pilots is going to be the Red Baron, fighting for the Germans. And so, Germany just embracing technology here. These are pictures of actual Zeppelins that are being used. You can see that there's a huge, area filled with gas to get these things to float, and then there's a small space underneath cockpit to kind of steer, to spy, and to drop bombs off. These things are pretty explosive. They're easy to shoot down, and so they're going to need airplanes to protect them. This is a Sopwith Camel. The Sopwith Camel is a prop plane, so we don't have jet engines yet. It's an open air, right? The pilot is exposed to the air. They have glasses and scarves to keep them warm that make them look super cool. The machine guns, actually, interestingly enough, are behind the propeller. And so the propeller spins the air, which creates the lift on the wings to get you up. So you need that propeller running. The machine gun actually is timed to shoot through the spinning props. And so, that's crazy technology for the time. And so they fly shooting machine guns at each other. The pilots also will have like grenades that they can drop down on enemy soldiers if they have time. That's not super effective, but it is scary. And so, Germans, although this is a British plane, the Germans are going to really kind of have the best planes. As a matter of fact, BMW is going to be the BMW car company is going to be created out of this. If you ever look at the BMW logo, it's like a white triangles and blue triangles. If you ever see that, that's actually supposed to represent a propeller spinning in the air with a blue background. Interesting fact. We're also going to see at this time period the development of chemical weapons. And so chemical weapons are really going to be experimented with during this war. And so a lot of the early forms, we're going to actually see chlorine is going to be the first gas that gets used. That gets used first at the Battle of Ypres. That battle gets pronounced differently from depending on who's talking about it. It's actually in Belgium. They say Ypres, the French say Ypres, the Americans say Wapres. That was terrible. But this YPrez, we're going to refer to it as chlorine gets used, and chlorine is super painful. Kills you over a few days, but not necessarily as effective once gas masks get used. At the Battle of Ypres, the Germans use it first. Again, shocker, the Germans embrace technology more than these other nations. And what they essentially do with the chlorine, they roll out these big 50-gallon drums, and then they that have chlorine gas in them. Chlorine that, when it is exposed to the air, turns into gas. And what they do is they test for the wind, and they wait for the wind to be blowing towards their enemy. They open up these vats, kind of run away, and then they let the wind be the delivery mechanism to their enemy. Well, that's going to backfire because winds shift. And so at the Battle of Ypres, we're going to see that wind shift and come back. And so chlorine is not very effective. Eventually, they'll move to mustard gas. Mustard gas is going to be definitely the most effective. Essentially, the way it kills you, it rots your body from the inside out. It's still really slow and painful, which is part of the reason why it is so psychologically terrifying. As a matter of fact, as a weapon, the fear of gas is actually more effective than what it actually does to people. I mean, it can brutally kill you, and the mustard gas gets through gas masks easier and can get you when it's on your skin. So it is terrifying, but essentially it doesn't get used very effectively, and so it's more psychologically terrifying than it is deadly to troops. About 100,000 people are going to be killed from gas attacks during World War One. And so when you're talking about millions dying, 100,000 is a small percentage of that. You know, barbed wire is more deadly than poison gas during World War One, but it is still kind of scary. They will start to change the delivery mechanism. Nobody wants to open a big vat of poison gas next to them. By 1916, we're going to be putting poison gas into artillery shells. And so you would load them with like the liquid form of this gas, set a timer on it, lob it over to the enemy, have it explode over their head. And then, very shortly, there's no big cloud coming at you. So you have to get your mask on really quick before you breathe any of this in, and it kills you. And so it's definitely more effective than wind as a delivery mechanism. And so it's going to be scary. Now, like I said, it's not really going to be that effective, because when you poison gas and use poison gas, the idea is like, kill everybody in the trench and then you take over that trench and gain that territory. Well, what happens is the poison gas comes, everybody puts on their masks and they run away. But then if you sent that poison, you can't run in and occupy that trench because the poison gas is there. The gas eventually dissipates, it goes away, and then your enemy troops come back to occupy that space. And so it's just not as effective of a weapon as people had hoped it would be. Not super effective. Also, we're going to see gas masks start to come about. And so again, this is going to be a thing that Germany figures out first. The first gas masks, first there are no gas masks, and people just put cloth over their mouth. What they realize quickly is if that you urinate on the cloth and then put it over your mouth, the urine is sterile, and so that helps you survive. But that it still isn't good enough, and it's gross. And so eventually you'll get cloth gas masks like these. They even, for the dogs that they have that help alert you to enemies' attacks, they'll make gas masks for dogs too. I find that adorable, but also really sad that they're using dogs, and they had to develop the mask because these dogs died. It's really sad. I don't know why it's more sad than when humans died. It shouldn't be, but for whatever reason it seems to be. I guess dogs are innocent. Anyway, I digress. Eventually, the Germans will be the first to develop gas masks like the one below. Both sides will get them, but they'll filtered masks. And so with the goggles that essentially protect your eyes, and then a filtered, essentially a charcoal filter that you can breathe through that will filter out the poisons. And so you can keep on through a cloud of gas attack and survive. So again, Germans using ingenuity, embracing science and technology and education that allow them to overcome, pretty what should be insurmountable odds. This is a actual photo of gas attacks. You can see why that's terrifying. In the course of a normal attack, I'm shooting at you, you're shooting at me. I feel like I can defend myself. I have control over my destiny because if I shoot you before you shoot me, I'm safe. Am I safe from that? Can I shoot that cloud? No, I can't. There's really nothing I can do except either run away or put on my gas mask and hope it doesn't leak. That's why it's so absolutely terrifying. The gas, even the and so one, it's terrifying because I can't defend myself, and two, it's terrifying because and there's some graphic images here. So if your stomach is weak, pause now. But it does things like that to you. It's excruciatingly painful. People's eyes will bleed, their lungs will liquefy, and they'll drown in their own lungs. It will eat off parts of their face and their hands. It's absolutely devastating and very, very scary. So, what are the effects of weapons? Well, the casualties suffered in the First World War were they were never seen at this level. Great Britain, her empire, will lose over 1 million combatants, France about 1.3, Russia about 1.7 million, and Germany and its allies will lose about 3.5. These weapons will be responsible for killing roughly 5,500 people a day. The world has not seen war like this before. They should have known. They should have been able to look at the casualties in the American Civil War and what happened at Shiloh, for example, and Antietam, and they should recognize that war is now extremely deadly. But unfortunately, sometimes we don't we don't pay attention in our history classes, and history repeats itself. And unfortunately, in World War I, it did, and it will repeat itself again. Just a few short years later with World War II. Sad days. All right, that concludes our lecture for the day. I appreciate your time. I will see you again shortly.